When I was 15 years old, my best friend Anthony invited me to his house for the weekend. His parents would be away, and we planned to spend the weekend playing video games, eating junk food, and staying up all night. I was eager for the fun, but I didn't realize how twisted things would become. I rode my bike to his house, left it in his backyard, and let myself in through the back door. We kicked off our evening with FIFA, Call of Duty, and a never-ending supply of popcorn. Laughter echoed through the house as we joked around, our energy buzzing with each new game. But as the night wore on, we grew bored of video games and moved on to prank calls. Around 10 o'clock p.m., Anthony made a few calls to pizza places, nothing out of the ordinary. It was my turn next. I dialed a few random numbers, hoping to catch someone off guard. On my fourth attempt, I finally got someone. The voice on the other end was deep, rough, and unsettling. "Yeah?" the man growled, making me freeze for a moment. Anthony was laughing in the background, and it only made me stumble over my words even more. I had never done a prank call before, and it showed. Finally, I managed to ask, Sir, would it be all right if I borrowed one of your car's wheels?" The voice on the other end was silent for a long moment, and then it spoke again. "What's your name, kid?" I paused. "My name's Bob." "You sure it's not Anthony?" A cold shiver ran down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked up at Anthony, whose face was drained of color, a look of pure fear washing over him. I immediately hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Anthony looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "Who the hell was that?" "I don't know," I muttered, my voice trembling. "Was that your dad's number?" "No, it was just my number, but my dad's name shows up when I call someone." Confused, we hopped on the computer to do some research. We couldn't find any way that someone could trace his name so easily. We were both too young for it to make sense. Anthony didn't want to call his dad, though. His parents had told him not to have anyone over that weekend. So we decided to go back to watching a movie, though the uneasy feeling lingered. Then we heard it. The sound of Anthony's front storm door opening. The door handle rattled, and the doorknob turned. We both froze. The lock on the door prevented it from opening completely, but it was enough to make our hearts race. Anthony quickly turned off the TV and I went to the window, my pulse quickening. I parted the blinds, and there, standing in the yard, was a tall figure staring directly at the house. As soon as he saw the blinds move, he turned and locked eyes with me. I slammed the blinds shut and motioned for Anthony to follow me as we rushed to the kitchen, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Then we heard the sound of the backyard gate creaking open. The man was moving toward the house. "God damn it," I whispered, realizing I had forgotten to shut the back door. Anthony urged me to run and lock it, but just as I reached the hallway, I froze. Standing outside the back door was a silhouette. I held my breath, praying he hadn't seen me. Slowly, the door opened, and he stepped inside. My heart pounded against my chest. I motioned for Anthony to follow me, and we made our way upstairs. We crawled under the bed, the muffled sounds of his footsteps below sending waves of dread through us. The floorboards creaked as he moved around, checking the closets, the bed. For what seemed like an eternity, there was nothing. Silence filled the room, and I almost dared to believe he had left. But then, the worst possible sound shattered the stillness. A blood-curdling scream from Anthony. The man had found him. He dragged Anthony from under the bed, and I felt my blood run cold. I scrambled for anything to defend myself, grabbing a screwdriver from Anthony's nightstand. With every ounce of strength, I plunged the screwdriver into the man's back. He screamed in agony and let go of Anthony, giving us the chance to break free. We ran into the woods, hiding behind bushes, desperately hoping he wouldn't see us. But his eyes scanned the trees. We could feel the weight of his gaze. After what felt like hours, we cautiously made our way back to the house, locking the door behind us. We called the police, but nothing could shake the feeling that the man was still out there watching. The next day, we saw him standing near the edge of the woods. He never came back again, but the fear stayed with us, a lingering reminder of how close we had come to death. It had been a rough few days and I needed a break. My wife and I had been arguing over the smallest things. That night it was the toilet seat. The shouting and stress had pushed me to my limit. So I decided to leave for the night. My good buddy Paul offered to let me crash at his place. His house was huge, much bigger than mine, and I welcomed the solitude. When I arrived, we cracked open a few beers and caught up. He was a good friend, one of those guys who had everything together. I was grateful for the break, though I couldn't help but feel guilty for walking out on my wife. Paul's house was impressive, but what stood out the most were his 3 guest bedrooms, each one bigger than my entire living room. He only used one for himself, and the other 2 were essentially storage spaces. I took the guest room across from his. It was a quiet night at first, but around midnight I started hearing strange noises from the adjacent guest room. At first I thought it was Paul messing around in there, but the noises weren't right. They were almost too quiet. I tried to ignore it, but after a while the faint sound of something scraping against the walls got under my skin. It wasn't normal. I decided to check it out. The door was locked, so I cracked it open and peeked inside. Paul was already in bed, fast asleep. When I asked him about the noise, he seemed confused. He hadn't heard anything. "It's just the wind," he said. "Go back to bed." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So I lay there in the dark, my mind racing, until I heard it again, this time louder. A faint tap on the wall, followed by a voice. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I couldn't take it anymore. I rushed to Paul's room, waking him up. He seemed more concerned now. He grabbed the key to the guest bedrooms, unlocked the door, and we stepped inside together. The room felt colder than it should, and a breeze hit us. The window was wide open. The closet door hung ajar, its contents missing. "Where the hell are all your things?" I muttered. That's when Paul ran out of the room, panic in his eyes. I followed him to the other guest bedroom. When we opened the door, we didn't expect to see a shadow darting out of the window. Paul's eyes widened, and before I could react, he rushed toward the window to give chase. But we didn't get far. As we stepped into the room, the sight that greeted us was far more chilling than anything I had expected. The bed was covered in blood, the sheets soaked in it. In the corner of the room, a butcher knife, the same one Paul had been missing, sat on the floor, still stained. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside. It was too late. Whoever had been living in his house for the past week was already gone. But we had no idea who they were, or how dangerous they might be. We never caught them. And to this day, I wonder if they're still out there, watching us. It was my first sleepover, and I was 10 years old. My best friend Jordan invited me to stay at his house. He lived in a big house with a huge basement, perfect for playing video games all night long. I couldn't wait. We stayed up late, laughing and playing games until we both collapsed on the couches, too tired to care about brushing our teeth. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the middle of the night. The basement was eerily quiet. The TV screen was on, showing a blank, static-filled image. But there, in the far corner by the stairs, something stood. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and almost reached the ceiling. I couldn't make out its shape. It was just there. I shut my eyes tight, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then, the TV clicked off, plunging the room into darkness. That's when I heard it. A soft, raspy breath, followed by a faint rustling sound. I stayed frozen, paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, Jordan screamed from upstairs, his voice raw with terror. I bolted upright and ran to the stairs, fear overtaking me. When I reached the top, Jordan's mom was sitting in the middle of the room, crying. His dad was frantically searching the house, looking for something or someone. But there was nothing. No sign of entry, no footprints in the snow outside. Later, Jordan told me his mom had seen a tall, shadowy figure standing by their bedroom door. I realized then that what I had seen in the basement that night wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real.